Good morning and welcome to the Daily Cyber Briefing for Wednesday, the 9th of October. I'm Stephen Ridgway. As you might have spotted, yesterday was Patch Tuesday, so there's a bunch of stuff out from Microsoft. 117 patches, which I think is the one of the largest Patch Tuesdays since the middle of the year. Quite a lot going on. So there are a couple of vulnerabilities that are under active exploitation, and various others that have varying severities. We'll talk about in just a minute. But the two that are being exploited, CVE 2024 43572, which is rated 7.8 and is an issue with Microsoft's Management Console. So I've been aware of this issue for a while. Basically, if you can trick a user into opening a specifically crafted MSC file, there is the ability to do all sorts of nasty things. Microsoft are rating this or defining this as remote code execution flaw, which I think is kind of true, and it kind of is, but equally you can't do this without you can't execute the exploit. You can't exploit the vulnerability even without persuading a user to open the malicious file in the management console. The other one, which is actively being exploited, is CVE 2024 43573, CVSS rating of 6.5, so not quite so serious, but still fairly high. It's a spoofing flaw in MS HTML, which we've spoken about this one previously. MS HTML is the browser engine that powered Internet Explorer, and I think a lot of us thought that had gone away when Internet Explorer was retired a while back. But you've got to bear in mind that earlier in the evolution of Windows operating system, File Explorer and Internet Explorer were converged, so that there was a lot of common code between them. That's, I think, has raised as many issues over the years as it's solved. I think probably my gut feeling would be that it was done to streamline development activities rather than because there was a good technological or customer benefit reasons for doing that. But either way, so it's still out there. MS HTML is still out there. It is inside most versions of Windows, including Windows Server. Anything after Windows Server 2012 R2 are vulnerable to this particular to exploits for this particular vulnerability. A lot of releases say of Windows 10 as well, so there is definitely a good reason to patch that, because it is a component that is deep down in the core of the operating system. Various other things going on. Most serious, or in fact a couple of quite serious vulnerabilities being addressed this time round. Remote code execution vulnerability in Microsoft Configuration Manager with a CVSS score of 9.8. That one is tracked as CVE 2024 43468. And a remote code execution via... No, sorry, that is remote code execution vulnerability. And there's also a CVSS score 9.0 elevation of privilege flaw in NetLogon CVE 2024-38124. So other than that, there's a lot of talk going on. You can listen to or read about some of the details of these things elsewhere. We haven't got time to go into an enormous amount of detail in the briefing this morning, but there's a high severity vulnerability in curl and vulnerabilities in WinLogon and so on, Hyper-V, various things, lots of things going on. So if you are considering what to do about this month's Microsoft patches, as always, recommendation would be do stand-up testing as long as nothing obviously has broken. Patch, don't patch your critical stuff first, but equally don't spend the next 6 weeks regression testing absolutely every single possible scenario, and then miss out on getting the patches in place and potentially be compromised in the meantime. Patching more often is, there's a trade-off, isn't there, with patching. If you never patch, it significantly increases the likelihood that you will be compromised. It also increases the likelihood that other components will cease to function properly as the world moves on, upgrades and so on and so forth. So not patching at all is a really dumb idea. At the other end of the scale, patching immediately with it's significantly less risky than not patching. But there is the possibility that you will break things as you patch. Now, so somewhere in between the two is a good place to be. My view is if you're patching regularly, you are less likely to have issues than if you patch less regularly. Patching in line with vendors' release cycles, I think, is generally a good thing to do. The reason for that, logic behind that is, and this has been borne out in practice, most software vendors, most developers are tasked with very significant regression testing, going from version X.A to X.B. Okay, they might well test reasonably well X.A going to X.C. But they probably aren't testing in any great detail X.A to X.D or anything beyond it. So the more you leave it, the more likely you are to get issues associated with patches. And if you get into a situation where in order to go from point A to point D, you have to go via, let's say, point C, if point D doesn't work, understanding where that issue was introduced becomes an awful lot harder. So the other side of that is, you should do some testing. My view on Windows machines has always been stand-up test for non-great. This doesn't apply to situations where life support systems in hospitals, for example. Full regression testing, please. We don't want people to die because of a patch. They're at the other end of the scale, generally never touched, which is another issue. But there we are. So stand-up testing on non-critical devices. If it stands up, if it works, begin the rollout. Risk assess your critical things. How likely, what's the likelihood and the impact, what's the actual risk to your critical systems, and then fit them in appropriately. Don't necessarily follow the same procedure every month. It depends on the specific risks to critical services. Because what you don't want to do is patch critical services early to avoid security issues and then find that they're where you're discovering service issues. the other way around. You don't want to patch everything else first. Discover that there were no service issues, but in the meantime, your critical services have been compromised because there are active exploits available. So you see what I mean? This is one of these areas where, with a little bit of thought, it's easy to get this right. If you're trying to just have a button that you push that goes, okay, do the same thing every month, you'll probably not be applying your security posture in a risk-assessed manner. Anyway, that's enough about patching for the moment. We'll talk endlessly about patching, so yeah, that'll do. Right, on other matters, Microsoft has detected growing use of legitimate file hosting services in business email compromise attacks. So, excuse me. It's a very useful, very illuminating article from Hacker News about how simple some of these attacks are becoming these days. So it's all part of the living off the land type arena. How can you use, in this case, this isn't talking about specific apps that pre-exist in your environment, but it is talking about pre-existing services that you would consider to be legitimate business services. So the attack path basically would be attacker compromises the user of a particular system using whatever, the usual sorts of methods, password spraying, whatever it may be, social engineering, whatever it is. Attacker gains access. Attacker then steals tokens that are used later to sign in as the compromised user. The attacker then creates a malicious file within the compromised user's file hosting environment and shares that file with legitimate looking restrictions to target recipients within the organization. Target recipient, of course, sees an email saying, here's your doc or whatever it might be. Because it's coming from an approved business system and appears to be following standard business processes, alarm bells are much less likely to ring in the minds of the users, and endpoint defenses and other defensive mechanisms are much less likely to recognize that as being a potentially malicious action. Then the recipient of the email saying, please check out this file, or whatever it may be, is required to re-authenticate via a link when they click on the file. So that takes the victim to a site managed by the attacker, so an attacker in the middle page. Attacker grabs credentials, including passwords, MFA tokens, so on and so forth. Then the file is shared to the victim. So very straightforward. It follows processes that would be normal for normal shared devices, rather difficult to identify until you're too deep into the attack. For most systems to be able to do much about it. So it's worth being aware of these things. What you've got to bear in mind is that it starts with the compromise of the user of company A's trusted file sharing system solution. So I think that's a very good place to begin to focus your attentions with these. After the event, it does become increasingly difficult to detect what's going on until it's a bit. Okay, and then finally from me today, an article on HelpNet Security talking about APIs again. Um, crux of it is that 30% of customer-facing APIs are not protected by HTTPS. Now, this is from traffic analysis by F5. F5, of course, sees a lot of traffic, so we can be reasonably confident that this is a good representation of what's actually going on out there. Issue there is, well, whatever security you're attempting to put against your API, if people can grab the traffic, they can reverse engineer what's going on, extract credentials, the whole piece. Okay, so what should we do? Well, if you're presenting, as always, if you're presenting APIs to the internet for whatever reason, it is very important to make sure that those APIs are properly secured. I don't think there's enough thought, enough discussion. I don't think it's hit the, well, it is on the radar, but I don't think it's in the right place on the radar as to what damage can be done through APIs. Fortunately, 80% of organizations begin API security at the design phase, and 60% in a survey have said that they incorporate security at every stage in the life cycle. So things are moving in the right direction. However, part of the problem is around fragmented responsibility for API security. So something like 53% of organizations manage it as part of application security. 30-something% have an API management and integration platform, which is effectively becomes responsible for API security. So this leaves gaps. It's an area that I think that is less well understood generally by security departments. And although there is, I think, if we went back, say, 5 years, this was I think the level of security was much worse, but I think the knowledge around how to exploit it was not as great either. So have a think. Definitely make sure you have mapped out where your APIs are. You have full understanding of how APIs can be accessed and what can be done through them and what levels of security. Again, business risk assessed approach to this. What could be compromised through those particular APIs. Okay, that's enough for me. Enough for me? Yeah, it is. Enough from me